So help me understand, what is it and what's really important for me to know about the behavioral health system as somebody who cares about teenagers and for our audience as well as people who care about young people, right? Gen Zers. What do we need to know?
I think one of the things that people need to know is really there's kind of two different behavioral health systems. In Arizona, we have access or state insurance. And what I work in is kind of within those youth who are maybe in the Department of Child Safety's care. I work with those youth in behavioral health services. Also those who are involved, who are the Department of Developmental Disabilities, so those with autism and seizure disorders, and cognitive disabilities, intellectual disabilities.
So like
and
at-risk
then,
youth,
and,
basically.
Yeah, and then any at-risk youth who maybe are struggling with substances, drugs, whatever that may be. So really any youth, and a lot of the work that I do are, youth who are lower income. And then there's the other side of it. There is the ones who don't meet that threshold and need behavioral health services, who aren't lower income and have to pay for it themselves.
Wow.
And that is a drastic difference between the two.
What's the difference? What do you see?
Well, the main difference is there is an actual system that exists for the lower income. There's clinics that exist with case managers and therapists and behavior coaches and independent living programs and all kinds of services available for these youth of lower income. Those who are not, you really limit the services available to them. They really only have, a psychologist or psychiatrist to go see, a psychiatrist to go get medication, and maybe a therapist if they can afford it. So kind of when you're over the threshold of that income and you aren't on that state insurance and don't have that availability to get those services, those youth are at a deficit. And I think we've seen through Real Talk in the East Valley in the Metro Phoenix area, we've seen, high suicide rates.
Man, I never thought about it like that.
Out in Gilbert.
That's crazy.
You're blowing my mind right now.
Those
I
youth
wish you would have told me this like a long time ago. That's a really great point.
Yeah, and those youth out there may not be getting the services they need because, one, their insurance doesn't provide it. They're not contracted to provide the services.
But it's assumed that they're getting it because they're from affluent areas.
Yeah, but I don't, unless their parents are paying for it or the school's paying for it, or, it could be getting missed. And a lot of kids just aren't talking about it. And I think that's the biggest thing, for one, that Gen Zers can do. And I think they're doing it because I see this push with the millennials that have come through the behavioral healthcare system and looking at Gen Z and advocating for behavioral health and speaking it out and saying, we're not going to hide this anymore. If I have depression, I'm going to let people know. So other people with depression know it's okay. I'm here.
So that's what you think. So that's what you think the reason for this is. I've often thought that too. Like, what makes Gen Z any different from teenagers before them? The difference is that Gen Z has a generation of people advocating for mental health for them. Like when I think about the people in my life, when I may have had mental health issues, basically it was like, pick yourself up by your bootstraps, get your stuff together and get down the road. Like, I don't think anyone took any mental health care needs unless it was like some kind of
unless it was like visible, right,
or some like extreme situation, like basically telling kids, unless you're extreme, your issues just need to be shoved down and mitigated and not ever dealt with.
That's good, bro.
So you got a whole generation of people who were taught never to take their mental health care issues seriously.
That's crazy.
Yeah, and I think we also have just some misrepresented stuff around behavioral health. A lot of times people like to talk about, when talking about depression, they like to link suicide to depression, and that's just not always the case. There can be a youth who's not depressed who still struggles with suicidal thoughts. And I don't think those are always linked, and we like to link it.
Can you elaborate on that a little bit? Like how is that a thing?
Yeah, I definitely think there's more economic pressures. We're going to see that in Gen Z around that are pushing suicide rates. So if you look at a lot of the data around the United States, the hot pockets of economic issues, you're going to see high suicide rates. And I don't think it's
kids that were never depressed before.
Yeah, and I think that's even more alarming because we look at youth who are not depressed. They've never really talked about this depression, but all of a sudden they're having these thoughts and there's so much stress involved. I think about the East Valley and just the diversity. There are a lot of affluent neighborhoods, but maybe you're not affluent, but you're at a school that is, and you're kind of the outcast now. You don't have the money. You can't really do the things.
Their job, right? Yeah, bro.
And now it's revealed that you're just
Right.
You're not rich
Man,
like you were pretending
that's
to
a
be.
good point, bro. And I've always wondered that because like when we go to schools where lower socioeconomic, like those kids they're not like
They're not rich.
taking their lives.
Yeah.
They're not, they're not struggling with
yeah.
the same
I get what you're
things. You know what I'm
saying,
saying?
yeah.
Like we're not seeing the same kinds of rates in some areas more than others. And
Right.
that's a profound point, bro. If you live in a richer part of town, but perhaps your parents really don't have the capabilities to get you the mental health care you need, or you feel in this social pressure not to talk about it, or your parents just
This is the first time you've ever had any real
exactly
pressure.
right. Like, dang, that's a profound point, bro.
Man, and if, like you said, they had underlying mental health issues and it wasn't being dealt with, which I thought earlier was a really profound point, like this COVID-19 situation, like it's just a tinderbox to reveal all that stuff, especially as their parents aren't able to recover economically. They have to move to Cesar Chavez High School, like who knows what happens. Man, I never thought about that. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's also a lot of people don't think about when mental illness, when some of that starts. It doesn't always show itself before 18 years old. A lot of times it's after. So maybe in high school, things were good. And things were fine. You didn't have depression or anxiety or whatever that may be. And then all of a sudden after 18, you get into college, which we know can be a struggle just learning how to be an adult. And then all of a sudden you have an episode of some sort connected to your mental health and you don't know what it is. You don't know how to handle it. You don't know who to ask for help. You're 18, 19, 20 years old, and you've all of a sudden had this problem that you have no idea where to go. So I think there's just a lot more to be talked about in our society around mental health. And I hope that it just becomes a norm and that kids, really speak up. And I think Gen Z can take what the millennials have done around mental health, because I think it's become a bigger issue in our nation and our culture to talk about mental health. Usually it comes up around shootings in schools politically, which, they use that platform for a lot of things. And I don't think school shooting should be the platform for mental health. Obviously, they just use it to do that. But I think we're seeing more and more of it being talked about, because I don't think when you connect it to a school shooting, you're connecting it to negative, this stigma around it, that you're going to shoot up a school if you have mental illness, which is not true at all. There's tons of youth who are struggling with mental illness every day going to school, and they're just fine, and they're having.
So you think they're afraid to admit that because they don't want to be labeled as a potential shooter or something like that?
Yeah, I look on the news every time there's a school shooting. Oh, he had mental health issues. And then you think a 17-year-old is going to go, oh yeah, I have mental health issues too. Like no one's going to do that.
That's a good point, bro.
No one's going to say that.
That's a good point, bro.
So if we keep connecting negative events to mental health issues, we're going to keep the negative stigma. And this is not just happening in our society. This is happening in healthcare as well. Not all doctors are the best supports for those with mental health. You go to your primary care physician and tell them you have a mental health issue. I just don't think they're not always trained to have those conversations. They may be trained in physical health, but they're not always trained in mental health. So that's why you see a big push for integrated care. We want to have clinics that have everybody and who are fully trained in all areas and how to have those conversations.
Can we talk about that a little bit more?
Yeah, what do you mean by integrative
everyone
care?
Doesn't understand what you mean when you say integrated care. Just
integrated care is more of a holistic approach. So think about a doctor's office with your primary care physician, also with your psychiatrist, with your therapist, with your case manager. Everyone's in the same office, so you're not going to multiple different offices to receive all your health care. It's kind of a one-stop shop, and that's really where healthcare is going right now. Even within the access plans and things like that. So for the lower income, we're looking at integrated care. So hopefully someday when you go to your doctor's office, they're asking you those questions. Hey, are you having any thoughts of suicide, hurting yourself or others? Kind of doing the screenings to make sure that, hey, are these things happening? Are you depressed? Do you have any anxiety? And having your primary care doctor ask those questions. Because I don't remember growing up, my primary care doctor, when I'd go in for a strep throat, were they like, hey, are you thinking about these things? That wasn't a question that I got. So I just think it's cool that we're moving in that direction. And I think that'll help with the stigma within healthcare. But also we do need to look at, influencing the next generation to stand up for those who have mental health issues. And
so good, man.
take it to the next level and say, we want you to talk about it. We want to hear from you. And there are tons of advocates and tons of public speakers out there who are sharing their stories, who are trying to get it out there to say, you are not alone. And that's really what all we're trying to do in the behavioral health industry, is saying, you are not alone. There's help for you. Please talk about it.
Yeah.
Let's
I noticed that recently.
Forums.
I was watching television and there was a commercial, and it was
Seize
kind of a
the
cool
awkward.
commercial. Yeah. The Seize the Awkward. And I was like, wow, these guys are really taking this issue seriously if they're putting a commercial and all that on television.
Man,
yeah, I think we're going to see it more and more, which is good. There's definitely a need to talk about these things. I mean, it's like any other illness that was out there, bring up a huge one, AIDS, right? Go back into the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, like, you didn't talk about that. That wasn't an open conversation about AIDS. Today, now it is. Let's talk about AIDS. Let's talk about how to prevent it. Let's talk about, we're just talking about, we want to make sure we're doing what we're supposed to do. We need to do the same thing with mental health. Let's talk about it. Let's put it out there. It's okay. We all struggle at times. We all have our different barriers in life.
Do you think someday that people will look at mental health kind of the same way they look at, a gym membership? Like, man, I need to do this thing because I need to stay as fit as possible. Like, it'll be destigmatized from like this thing that like people at the beginning of the year, they sign up to get, a therapist or something like that, kind of the gym membership. Do you ever see that being a potential, something like that?
Yeah, certainly. I think one of the things that comes to mind is when we look at our entertainment industry. I look at the 90s TV shows, and when there's comedies, they're like, I'm going to go see a shrink. I'm going to go see they kind of make fun of it in the sense of those conversations are kind of a joke, or there's something wrong with you. When I think we're hopefully heading in a direction where that's not the case. Going and seeing a therapist, a counselor is not a bad thing. It's not even a bad thing for those who don't have a mental health issue and just need to talk about something that's going on in their lives and just need help. And so we should definitely not put stigma around therapists or around counseling. It is a good practice. Healthy people should even at times have those conversations and maybe go work some things out. So I don't think that should be stigmatized at all. And hopefully they will become a really cool thing to where people are open about it, and it's not pushed to the side and seen as a weakness, because I see a lot of strengths in those who have mental health issues, a lot of overcoming adversity, and some of the most hardest working people, even though they may have limitations, they're going to find ways around those limitations. And
Man,
so we need to be supporting them.